We go. Some more gaming and streaming for the afternoon.
It is a big deal. I mean, this is definitely an unprecedented move. These are scientists, public health officials, vaccine advisors who usually don't really have like a political affiliation. They're in this position to act as, in an advisory role to review the science, to discuss different recommendations around vaccines and ages and who should be using different vaccines. They meet a couple of times a year and they are really responsible for helping to set the vaccine schedule for children. And this is something that Kennedy has been talking about. Obviously, a huge priority for him and for the administration is rooting out what they've called corporate influence in some of these science roles and in these health agencies. But these vaccine advisors, this committee is really seen as sort of like an independent agency, or not an agency, but an independent panel who make recommendations to the agency and then they can act on that. And so what he's doing is getting rid of all 17 members of this voting committee. They usually serve around 4-year terms. And what happens next is sort of to be determined, but they're saying that they are going to replace and appoint, an entirely new 17 voting members of this committee.
All right, wait. So new members are going to come in.
Yeah, that is what's likely going to happen. Because most of the members that were on this committee didn't have terms that expired until 2028. So in this op-ed, Kennedy said, without totally sort of stripping this committee clean of all the current members, they wouldn't have been able to appoint new people until 2028. And in that way, sort of treating these as political appointees, but historically they haven't been. It's scientists and public health experts who are typically appointed to this committee, and it's not really people that are seen as political appointees.
Madison, trying to understand the implications of a move such as this, does it mean that the childhood vaccine schedule could change? Does it mean that annual flu shots might not necessarily come with the same cadence or the same recommendation? What are the implications of this?
It's sort of to be determined because we don't know how quickly they're going to put new people in. That's one of the things that we don't know yet. Is maybe they already have a list of people that they're going to want to put into these roles. But, there is an upcoming meeting and it's important, I think, that they act quickly in order to ensure that the schedule and, stays on track and that they are able to roll out these important recommendations and to keep things moving. So right now, there's still a lot of questions that are not answered in this op-ed, but this was something that Bill Cassidy.
Yeah, the biggest question being why? Why would you just throw out the baby with the bathwater here and remove the entire CDC panel all at once in one day? The only reason that I can think of that would have any legitimate air behind it is, as they were saying previously, RFK Jr. has been trying to root out corporate influence and monetary influence in government positions like this. And I would suppose that he would preface this by saying he has evidence of severe corruption in all of these panel members and they must all go. That's a pretty high accusation, pretty high bar there. Like, what kind of evidence does he have? And even if he does anybody actually regard it as enough, factual and true? It really seems to me like they're just trying to, or rather RFK Jr. is trying to remove the entire previous panel that didn't align with the current administration's policies and desires, whatever the word is, and is going to be replacing them with yes men, people that are more in line with what they're looking for. Even though this position has nothing to do with political affiliation, it is all 100% about vaccination strategy and the science behind it. And yeah, that makes no sense to me why anyone would think that this is okay or just normal, that they could just appoint a whole new panel.
Senator Bill Cassidy actually was one of the agreements that he had with RFK and with HHS when he voted to confirm him, was that there wouldn't be major changes to this committee, which is called ASIP, without Cassidy being involved. And so we don't know, if he was aware about this, but this is, an important sort of agreement that the two had made contingent on Bill Cassidy voting to confirm Kennedy.
You know, Madison, I think about this, right? With all kinds of healthcare, you need independence, you need transparency. You want to make sure that care and advisories around healthcare or vaccines are very true and safe, and there are no politics in it. There are no companies necessarily pushing anything. So what I'm curious is, I mean, if this panel becomes more politicized in some ways, does the AMA come in? Does somebody else come in and say, listen, there's a lot going on in Washington. Here's what we recommend. And is that enough for people to listen? Or do you need these panels or this committee because that's where healthcare coverage comes in? Or, you know, I'm just trying to understand the importance also of this committee beyond the advisory.
Yeah, I mean, this committee is really important for helping to set the, you know, immunization schedule for kids. And this is a part of the decision-making process that our healthcare agencies use. And I think that that's something we've been all trying to figure out, is there are a lot of changes happening with the way that they're, you know, around recommendations for vaccines, and, you know, how does this change the status quo? And are we going to see other outside agencies, like you mentioned, like AMA or other organizations come in and try to make their own recommendations? Like, we don't really know what's going to happen, but it's clear that there's definitely a shakeup happening in the, you know, regular way that our healthcare agencies operate. And I think that that's kind of what Kennedy and what, you know, some of his sub-agencies and subordinates want,
Right.
is they want this shakeup. They think that that's a good thing. And it's sort of to be determined still what that actually will look like and sort of where the pieces will fall when it's all said and done.
It's crazy.
Killings not just in Yemen, but in Gaza, where he greenlit an invasion called Operation Gideon's Chariot with the express aim of wiping out the Gazan population. You promised to put America first. Haven't you and your ilk sold America out?
No.
Well, I'm glad you have great intellectual substance and can answer. Because it's all the
Yeah,
cultural
get
wars
'em.
for you, isn't it? The second someone actually tells you what you're doing, which
Can you
is
just
bread
can you
and
calm down a
circus.
little bit, like just a little bit? Pounding the table, you're all over the place. No. You want me to go piece by piece, or would you like me to talk slower?
I think you can.
Number one, Donald Trump is convening a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Joe Biden gave them
that's
armaments.
going well, isn't it? It's going well.
Can you not interrupt
It's
me?
going well.
I allowed you to talk uninterrupted.
You're famous for not interrupting.
Yeah, I haven't interrupted a single person here today. Can I speak uninterrupted, actually? Okay. He is convening a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. I believe we will see an end to that war. Number two, he's actually talking to Iran and discouraging Israel to strike the interior of Iran, and has stopped many other international countries to do the same. Number three, can you give him credit for ending the Indian-Pakistan war?
Both of them said he didn't do that.
Well, hold on a second.
Let's go back.
No,
They're
that's
right, both
Russia, Ukraine.
India and
Is the-
Pakistan.
Can I speak now?
yes, but the Indian-Pakistan thing, you got to go deeper than that.
Let's go in order. Is a peace summit where the main person in question, Russia, doesn't show up, is that a success, Mr. Kirk?
Great question.
I'm not even sure.
Is that a success?
Well, again, these are ongoing negotiations, and it's a lot better than when your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, went alongside our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to Istanbul and unnecessarily blew up a potential Russian peace deal, which has resulted in hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians, one of the great unnecessary wars of the modern era. Donald Trump believes in conversation and police boot through strength. He has been president for well over 120 to 130 days, and he has already ended a war between two nuclear conflicts of India-Pakistan. He has secured our own U.S. southern border while we were being invaded by foreign powers. And thirdly, he is brokering a potential settlement with Iran that will prevent a major escalation in the Middle East. And finally, it is very difficult, but I believe they'll get it done, that will finally see an end to the Russian-Ukrainian war.
I'm just going to disregard the enormous lies you just put out there about Russia and Ukraine. But do you really think leverage
What lies-
negotiations work if you cut off all your leverage and scream at one party in the Oval Office? Don't you think that has just emboldened Russia? Because look at the approach. Putin thinks so much of your glorious president, he can't even be asked to show up. You have elected, or help elect, somebody who is at best an idiot and at worst is deeply corrupt.
Okay, again, so Trump and Putin had a 2-hour phone call today. You'll acknowledge that's a good thing. The pursuit of peace can
Just a phone
sometimes
call.
be a winding road, and it's a lot better than sending hundreds of billions of dollars further into the killing fields of eastern Ukraine, something that tragically both the UK government and the US government has been unnecessarily supporting for a couple of years. President Trump wants to see a brokerage, an ending of this settlement. I pray we can get it. It's very complicated because of the mess that Joe Biden left, which was an active kinetic war with a nuclear power.
Everything is Joe
American-made
Biden's
missiles
fault.
into the interior of Russia. So President Trump has already ended a war. He's ended an invasion. He's only 130 days into this. And I believe, we do not know. At this point, we are merely speculating, which I think we should not spend our time doing that, because eventually one of us will be right. I believe we'll be right, and I believe we'll see an end to this war.
Can we just talk about 100 billion's worth of weapons? Because you dodged my question on what was going on in the Middle East, where Trump has just signed enormous arms contracts with Saudi Arabia and with Qatar. And I noticed you ignored the fact that this might have had anything to do with the blatant corruption going on through the Trump coin and going on through giving the very competent sons of Donald Trump billions of investment from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This is something that is directly embroiling Americans into conflict, but is importantly killing many innocent people. Those nations have been known to terrorize innocent civilian populations. So if you're coming to me and you're objecting to America selling weaponry, why are you defending shilling for the Saudis?
Well, hold on. One is sending weaponry, one is purchasing. Secondly, you do know that the biggest purchase that was announced was commercial airliners, 737, $100 billion. You've heard of Qatar Airways. They purchased $100 billion of commercial airways. You are right, there were some weapons contracts. But I guess the question is, would you rather have Saudi Arabia buy weapons from America or China?
I'd rather they not have American weaponry at cut price rates.
See, I disagree.
But let's talk about Qatar.
You disagree with that?
Qatar. You've been talking a lot about Hamas and the evils of Hamas. Can I ask you, who's the main funder of Hamas?
Well, the
Nobody
Palestinians.
knows.
Well, the West actually funds Hamas.
Which state?
Well, Iran funds.
No.
and also-
Where are the Hamas leaders?
And also
Where are the Hamas
Qatar
leaders?
funds Hamas. It
Yes.
is a combination
So is
of
this a state we
international
should have
relief
a
organizations.
400 million jet with the President of the United States
Well,
on it?
hold on. First of all, it was not given to him personally. I understand the optics of it, but it was not given to him personally. It was given to the U.S. government. And under that.
Then why are they putting it in the presidential library for the purpose of him being able to use it after his term as president? Like, if they're not giving it to him personally, there's no point in doing that. All it does is make it look like it's a gift just for him. If it was a gift for the American people, or for the office of the president, or even for the Air Force, it would stay as Air Force One after the term of the presidency, which is so ridiculous that it would be retired afterwards, because it's only been in service for what, the couple of years left that Trump will have his presidential term after they get to retrofit it, which means millions of dollars involved in retrofitting and securitizing the new jet as Air Force One, and wasting all that money just so it can be retired afterwards, and a new Air Force One created by Boeing or whoever normally does it. What an incredible waste of money. And how does it not look like it's just for him?
That standard, no U.S. government should ever receive any gifts from any foreign countries whatsoever. It's not given to him personally, and not a violation of the.
Then why is he trying to transfer it to his personal library?
He
He
is actually okay. Again, he sent
He's
out.
totally not.
This is way too in the weeds. If you want to keep on going, we can.
It's not in the weeds. It's a fundamental moral principle.
Okay, so under that fundamental moral principle, then, can you acknowledge, though, that President Trump is getting more done in a less period of time than any president we've seen, while our prior president did not even know what year he got elected?
What kind of argument is this? Like, any president can get more done than any other president. What matters is not the frequency, the rate of what they're getting done. What matters is whether it's worthwhile, whether it's what we want, whether it's constitutional and represents the will of the people, and, as they say, makes America great again. But you just keep sticking with the idea that, oh, he's doing lots, so that means it's good.
You understand the contrast here?
Whataboutism again? I'm not a defender of Biden.
I'm not saying President Trump is far better than
You have to
predecessor.
defend the person you spent millions to
I am.
elect.
I will defend every day of someone who ends an invasion.
That's all you do, is
brings down the price of oil, who is revitalizing the American economy, who's brokering peace, who stopped the potential nuclear war, who is bringing Iran to the table and bringing Russia to the table. Someone who does not want armed conflicts with the greatest powers of our time. I will defend that endlessly.
You are living
What are you
in
defending?
a fantasy world of your own creation. So it's quite hard
You
to
can
engage
say that,
with.
but then disprove
But
it.
let's check on how Trump is doing in terms of diplomacy. Look, With the war in the Middle East, do you think it was a defensible decision to tell the Israelis you wanted Trump Gaza, to agree for Israel to invade the Gaza Strip, and to continue to murder thousands of innocent children and civilians in a pointless war? Is that in America's interest? Is that in humanity's
Well,
interest?
first of all, you should know something about Trump. There's something, if you haven't realized with Trump over the last 10 years, he is quite the social media user and uses hyperbolic language at times. But let me ask you, in the conflict of Israel versus Hamas, who's the good guy?
I believe both Hamas and the Israeli government are evil, but I think also that there is no justification.
Are they equally?
There is no justification for the murder and mutilation of thousands of innocent people and children in a futile.
Let's zero in on that.
There is no justification, Mr. Kirk, for invading hospitals, for bombing innocent populations and dragging out a war which is damaging Israel and the West's security.
You've made that point, but
Well, it's not a point, it's a moral truth, isn't it?
yeah. It was also a moral truth that the war started because 1,300 Jews were killed and 200 were taken hostage. And when you declare war on Israel, expect a firestorm in reaction. Let me finish, I let you talk. Israel, at its holiest day of the calendar year besides Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, Samat Torah, the 50-year anniversary of the Six-Day War. On Shabbat, Hamas invaded Israel, deciding to go recklessly to music concerts, to homes, to kibbutzes, and taking 200 plus hostages. They knew what they were doing. In one of the most cloistered urban environments on the planet, 2 million people live in a place where it's impossible to wage war. Impossible. Where they wear civilian clothing, they violate every tenet.
I don't understand why Charlie Kirk feels like he's cooking here. The student literally just said, I believe that both are committing atrocities, right? Both are negative and have been doing terrible things in this war. And then Charlie Kirk's response is to come in and say, this one side has done these terrible things and they deserved it and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I agree. And it's both of them. It's not just one. I didn't pick just a side. War is bad in general, regardless of the side that you're on. Do you want to debate over whether one side is more justification than the other? Fine, we can get into that. But in this particular case, I know very little about the Israel-Hamas conflict, but as far as I understand, both sides have done terrible things over many decades, and some sides have done good things and tried to commit peace. However, there's so much of a muddy water there that neither side comes out as being the clear good guy or bad guy in this scenario. There is no way that this conflict ends without both of them having to compromise something in order to get it done. At the very least, well, yes, having to compromise something.
The Geneva Convention, and the IDF, when they do something right, they get no credit. When they do life-saving surgeries of a Gazan child, they get no credit. When they drop leaflets, they get no credit. But when they happen to bomb a place where they are operating their military from, which we now know from third-party verified sources, hundreds of Hamas military operations are in mosques, schools, and hospitals. I'm sorry, the country where they were living in relative peace on October 6th, that all of a sudden we had a war and Hamas started the war. And I don't see people that were really upset about the 2 million Germans that were killed in World War II, civilians. A tragic truth of war is that civilians die. I don't like it and you don't like it. And they brought it upon themselves. The only operation and entity to blame is the leadership of Hamas, not the Israeli government, for fighting this defensive war after they were invaded.
I'm no defender of the terrible pogrom that was launched against Jews on that day. But the justification for the death of innocents cannot be an infinite cycle of bloodlust. It cannot be killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians with a war with no end in sight, people who are not complicit in those atrocities. It cannot be bombing hospitals which children use. It cannot be bombing hospitals in which cancer patients are dying and starving in there. The deaths that have been inflicted, nobody knows the true toll, but somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people lie dead under the rubble. And what is left for Gaza except for to continue to suffer under Hamas? Because it turns out Netanyahu's political strategy has not worked. It has entrenched Hamas within the territories. To be a Christian, I would have thought, Mr. Kirk, would never have involved suggesting that the price for an atrocity must be an infinite cycle of bloodlust, that innocent people and the young population must be killed to avenge some kind of providential quest. How can you call yourself a Christian? Well, you just did.
I want to make sure we get our moral clarity straight before we proceed. No one likes what's happening in Gaza. No one with a heart or a soul or a mind likes when kids die. But you must understand who started the conflict so that you could end it correctly. And until Hamas brokers an unconditional surrender, of which
And what if both sides are to blame? What if there isn't one side that's the big baddie that clearly needs to take responsibility and be the one shut down? What if both sides have valid claims to atrocious things they've both done? What do we do then? What do we do? Can you tell me, Charlie?
They are unwilling to do. They could release the hostages and drop their weapons and their lives would be spared. Instead, they are using children of Gaza as cannon fodder, financed by the Iranian mullahs and dragging the entire world into this conflict. So I don't even know what we're debating at this point other than I believe that Israel, I believe the facts, Israel was unconditionally attacked on October 7th. They're responding in kind. And I would just ask you a very simple moral question. How should Israel have responded?
Not with the blanket carpet bombing of the city, not with bombing hospitals. Of course, some kind of military operation might have been necessary, but not murder on this scale. There is no justification for what is happening with the enormous death toll that is being produced. I really cannot see how you come here and you have the gall to lecture us on Christian morality and then sit here and justify the murder of thousands of civilians. And is it working, Mr. Kirk? Is Hamas dismantled?
I've never said that.
You just did.
Well, no,
this is your whole
in
thing.
war, these are called casualties of a war.
We're going to need to stop bringing this
Again,
to close.
I'm not going to justify every military maneuver of a 100,000 person army. Instead, what I will do is I'll be clear that there is a good guy and there is a bad guy. I honestly...
Isn't that the morality of a child?
Well, instead... Well,
there you go.
It's interesting you say that, because a child who knows that Israel is the good guy, Hamas is bad, has a lot more wisdom than a student like yourself at Cambridge University.
Says the child.
I will be glad that I will not have been somebody who has defended the genocide of the Palestinian people. And I think you will have to reckon one day that you have reckoned with...
Interesting. I want to close on this. So can you tell me what African country is currently ongoing a civil war?
Believe it or not, I know about Sudan because I'm not an idiot.
How about what Southeast Asian country has an ethnic...
I couldn't have named any of them in Africa. I'm sure there are some that are going through it, but I couldn't have named one off the top of my head. So good on you.
Cleansing going on right
now.
Good. And you have strong opinions on both sides?
Unlike you, I take an effort to be informed about...
Even if he isn't informed on the conflicts in Africa, why does that disparage his argument for Israel-Hamas? Like, that doesn't make a difference. You're not allowed to have an opinion on one conflict just because you haven't studied other conflicts or all of them? Weak argumentation.
Foreign policy and to come to conclusions. You are a culture warrior. I believe when everything is done, Mr. Kirk, people will see you and the people you supported as corrupt, as selling the country out to the lowest bidder and of doing irreparable damage to a country I'm sure we all deep down love.
The difference...
you will have to reckon with that
difference
one, Mr. Kirk.
Is when...
Mic drop moment from the young Brit there. Absolutely phenomenal. It's so good to see Charlie Kirk really...
All right, I don't care for the additional here. Let's find another video to watch. What else looks good?
President
more about the California riots.
calling in the National Guard without direct request from a state's governor is extremely rare. KPRC2's Mario Diaz is live downtown with more on that approach. Mario.
And it is approach, Lisa, that it is legal. And that's an important issue to bring up here, that it is legal to take this step. Keep in mind, the governors of most states have control of the National Guard, which is why you see the name Texas National Guard, California National Guard, right? Because it's part of that state. The governor does control it. But the complete and total control, well, that lies in Washington, D.C., which allows the federal government to actually say, hey, we want to send in the National Guard if they feel the civil unrest is too much or the safety risk too great to the public. for that the local authorities simply cannot handle it.
The local police, the local sheriffs, they're really the first line in defending buildings, defending property.
But in Los Angeles, President Donald Trump felt there was no more defense. So he took a rare but legal step of sending in the National Guard for law and order, a step that President Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas took in 1965 during the 5-day Selma March, only he did it for the defense of civil rights. Two presidents, two different political parties, same rare approach.
It is certainly unique in a historical context, but we also don't know what those communications were or how they may have broken down.
Ryan Patrick was the U.S. attorney based in Houston during the peaceful George Floyd March 5 years ago. It was a massive demonstration that Patrick recalls well.
I was in constant communication with our major and even smaller city police chiefs, sheriffs, the state police, our National Guard. We were in communication the entire time to make sure that there were not these holes that could create other problems.
But when problems do escalate to a certain point, the calling for the National Guard brings with it an additional layer that makes a situation like the one in LA even more complex.
It is as much a safety issue as it is a political issue. So at what point do the chiefs, the sheriffs, federal law enforcement on the ground start getting that message to the state governor saying we're going to need assistance, or that decision simply being made in Washington, which again is as much a public safety call as it can be a political call.
And speaking of political calls, I had one about 90 minutes ago with the man who calls that building behind me, Houston City Hall, his business office, and that is Mayor John Whitmire. We talked about the situation in LA. He says that he and obviously HPD and others have been seeing what they have captured on the news there, but he also said that in Houston we're much different. As he pointed back to the George Floyd protest, it was a very peaceful march. Houstonians do know how to show their opposition and demonstrate differently and demonstrate proper procedures here. They do it respectfully. And he highlighted the fact there was a demonstration yesterday here in Montrose with HPD helping out in that demonstration and marching, or actually, I should say, guiding the marchers as they made their way through the streets. I bring this up because there is a planned march for Saturday, a National Day of Marches, according to law enforcement experts that I've spoken with. We'll have more on that taking place here in Houston coming up at 4:30. That's the very latest in downtown at City Hall. Mario Diaz, KPRC 2 News.
Craziness. What else is interesting? Nothing catching my interest. It's gotta be something. Come on. I guess we'll try this.
If the American
David Pakman and Lex Friedman. Let's see what they have to say to each other.
right wing were to get everything it wants, it would be a horrifying reality. If the left were to get everything it wants, we'd have to figure out a few things, including exactly how we pay for certain programs. But they're mostly noble goals. And I believe that they are more supportive of an individual self-determining what they want to do in life and how they want to live, and is more in line with the idea of freedom and liberty than what the right is currently proposing. That's my view.
In today's video, David Pacman absolutely destroys Lex Friedman in a heated debate on wokeism. Lex came in with the usual vague critiques. Wokeness has gone too far. Cancel culture is dangerous. You know the script. But Pacman wasn't buying the buzzwords. He calmly and surgically dismantled the narrative, asking for specifics, drawing the line between real social progress and manufactured outrage, and exposing how the term woke has basically become a lazy catch-all for anything conservatives don't like. While Lex was trying to be diplomatic and ask big questions, David made it.
Of course, people will disagree with me. They'll say, no, we get to freedom and liberty the way that the right wants to do it. Okay, well, we can have that conversation.
So I think you've implied in your answer, it was kind of focused on policy. It felt like it was focused on policy. There's other stuff that people worry about.
Sure.
Particularly with the left, what may be termed the woke mind virus. Right?
Where have I heard? Who's using that term a lot now? I'm trying to think.
I'm not sure. Not sure where it comes up.
I wouldn't know.
But the cultural aspect of this,
sure,
that if you give a lot of power to people on the left, like, as you gave as an example, there would be a lot of kind of censorship and suppression of speech, and a kind of dividing up of a society of who's allowed to, basically a reallocation of resources, not based on merit, but based on some kind of high ethical notions of what is right. And only a very small percent of the population gets to decide what is fair, what is right. Which is,
we already have a small portion of the population deciding fair. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe they are the ones who actually get to decide, but what do you mean only they get to decide? We live in a federated republic where we vote for our representatives. Yes, that means few people actually get to decide, but we are deciding who the deciders are. That's not, I don't know, what he says on his face is technically true, but it's not representative of reality, if you ask me.
But I don't know how many different ways I can say kind of a negative characterization of folks on the left when we're now comparing it, just as to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
So is that something that you worry about? So setting policies aside, wokeism.
Yes.
How big of a problem is it?
This is a great conversation. So let's two sides of it. Okay. We have new polling that seems to suggest so-called wokeism is kind of more popular in the United States than anti-wokeism. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. This is the less interesting part. We'll go to the more interesting part second. Sometimes what people mean by wokeism is an overreaction to a perceived injustice that goes beyond what would be fair and equitable. There was this really interesting poll, and it asked questions like, for example, do you believe society has gone too far, not far enough, or just about the right amount in dealing with issues affecting the trans community? The woke position, which is society hasn't gone far enough, was far more popular than we've gone too far. Now, the right-wing media narrative is we've gone way too far, this is out of control. And there are lots of other similar answers. It's not a huge margin. A lot of these are like 58 to 42, 60 to 40. It's not like 90 to 10, but by a small margin, the so-called woke perspective of we actually haven't yet done enough to fix some of these issues is a little bit more popular. So if we went back to DeSantis, this is part of why I think DeSantis's anti-woke agenda may just be a political misstep.
Now, David didn't dodge the tough stuff. He openly acknowledges he's a progressive and owns that bias, but what makes his arguments compelling is that he backs them up with facts and nuance. When Lex brought up the so-called woke mind virus and fears of censorship or overcorrection, David calmly dismantled the panic by pointing to actual polling. And David made an important distinction. Yeah, there are moments when the left overreaches, where the response to injustice might be clumsy or go too far. But those moments aren't nearly as dangerous as what the modern right is pushing: book bans, anti-LGBTQ laws, voter suppression, and whitewashing history in schools. That's not a culture clash, that's legislation with real consequences. What really stood out was when David compared outcomes. If the left got everything it wanted, we'd be debating how to fund healthcare or education programs. If the far right got what it wanted, we'd see civil rights rolled back, identity erased from public discourse, and free speech weaponized against marginalized people. One of those outcomes is inconvenient. The other is just terrifying.
That's a really interesting result. I wonder how the questions are framed, but it's still interesting, nevertheless, no matter what, to hear that majority of people in America are woke, not in the negative sense of the word.
The poll didn't use the term woke.
Right.
Right. This is a critical thing.
Let's use the term woke positively.
The term has kind of been perverted.
Yes.
4 years ago, when the term was started to be used, I would have said, oh yeah, woke just means like I have become aware of problems that are bigger than any one person can fix for themselves that relate to the system. I think that's what, and we might disagree on which problems fall into that category, but like it was kind of benign. I think now it just means like outrageously left-wing, maybe even with socialist or Marxist undertones. It's become a pejorative at this point.
But also like bullies. Like people,
sure, censorers.
Yeah, but people that go around calling others racist, oftentimes, without any proof of or justification.
Fair.
But that's a few folks on Twitter. You're saying, like, the polling is starting to show that, like, no, there's still most of the Americans still care about these issues and want to improve, want to make progress.
I think that's the case, and they want to do it in a genuine way that doesn't suppress or oppress anybody. But now let me get to, like, to what degree do I think that when it goes too far, is a problem? Mm-hmm. It absolutely exists. We can find instances of where this exists on the left. I've been told many times that as a Jewish Argentinian immigrant to the United States, I actually don't qualify as oppressed enough because Jews are privileged now in the US and my family had just enough money to leave Argentina. So there's this kind of like oppression Olympics thing where I've been told you don't get to comment. For example, like a topic in the Latino community now is, are you familiar with Latinx? Mm-hmm. Okay. In Spanish, there's an analogous movement where words by their nature sort of like have a gender. So like the word for friend is amigo. But if it's a woman, you would say amiga. So right from there, you can tell the gender that we're talking about. And if it's a mixed group, you say amigos. It's the male with an S, but it could include both. There's a movement now which wants to do away with that and put the letter E in. It's a new word, okay? It's a gender neutral word, amigues, totally new. I don't like that. And I don't know no one in my family uses it. And I think it's kind of like a strange imposition from someone kind of with a solution in search of a problem. I've been told, you moved to the US long ago and like your English is good and like you look white. And so like you don't get to weigh in on that. That I think is an example, if I understand correctly, of the type of thing you're talking about. I'm kind of being bullied. I'm fine. I'm surviving fine. But I'm being bullied over it and disqualified and saying you don't get to speak on this issue. All of those examples, all of that stuff, I am completely against. And I tell people on the left, we're actually hurting our own movement with this stuff. I just don't think it's as big as some others believe.
Lex came in with the now standard concerns, wokeness being used. David's take was to lose sight of.
I see Biden as center left. Those who see Biden as extreme far left, this stuff has played almost no role whatsoever in the first 2+ years of his administration.
Well, there's people that see him far left.
There's people on the right who, I mean, Trump says Biden's a Marxist, socialist, communist.
I haven't heard that because I don't think that would stick very much.
He says it at every rally.
Yeah.
which I'm
I
so
love how-
jealous that you don't watch these things.
I
It's
love
like,
how deeply researched you are in Trump. I can only imagine how good your Trump impression is at this point.
it's not very, sadly, it's not good.
It's not all right.
No, but and I'll say one other thing on that. Take trans, because trans, just to talk about it a little bit, we haven't dealt with it much. The trans issue has become huge, I believe, because the right is obsessed with it. The right is very much not concerned with gay men anymore. It used to be that gay men is like, oh, we have to stop gay men from adopting and unnatural and pedophiles. Now it's trans, it's drag shows, etc. I do think that there is a fair question to say, how do we deal with trans women in a very small, short list of sports? That's real, okay? My view, though, is I go, okay, we have all issues. We have issues related to gender and sexual orientation. We have issues related to trans. Within that, we have specifically sports. You can eliminate from that trans men. Nobody's worried, right, about women, biological women who are trans men. And then when you say it's only in certain sports that it matters, hey, I'm right there. I think it's a complicated question. I don't know how we deal with it. I would ask leagues that have experience with this already and whatever. The problem I have is pretending that the vanguard of left-wing politics right now is trying to force trans women into sports. It's like, it's just not the big issue that the right is reacting as if it were.
Now the conversation turned to trans issues, and again, Pac-Man handled it with clarity and honesty. He acknowledged the legitimate complexity of trans women in certain sports, which even many on the left admit is a nuanced issue. But he also called out the bigger picture. The right has created an obsession with the trans community that's completely out of proportion with reality. David made the smart distinction that you never hear in bad faith discourse. No one's worried about trans men in sports. The outrage is laser focused on trans women, often with little regard for actual athletic data, league policies, or the real life people being affected. And it's not like the progressive movement is being driven by sports policy. It's being driven by a push for basic dignity, healthcare, and legal protections for trans people.
Here, I'm over this video. Let's see. What else have we got?
We got an Awesome ruling by a U.S. federal court. This is a federal trade court specifically dealing with Trump's tariffs.
And to me, it's just like an obviously correct ruling. Even if you love tariffs, you can't do it like this. But now we're hearing about the judicial coup from the kind of far MAGA right about all these judicial activists. The cat turd MAGA account called called them commie judges. There's a new wave of kind of populist nationalism. Stephen Miller agrees far more with Bernie Sanders on economics than he does with Ronald Reagan.
But who would you consider like the intellectual class of MAGA influencer?
I can take their arguments defending him much more seriously. Whereas there's some people like the Benny Johnsons of the world who I would debate, but he's just so unserious. Like Trump could do anything and he would just twist himself in a pretzel to support it. So I understand that struggle. I don't have the incentive to kiss the ring and just defend the thing of the day, because no matter what, like I'm not invited to the influencer briefing. I tried to get in, they won't let me in.
You didn't get the Epstein files binder. We should get into this because this is probably the most sensitive of where our disagreements might lie, although I don't know, it will be the Medicaid stuff. The Republicans who can't stomach humongous Medicaid cuts, which this is proposing something like $800 billion in cuts.
He and his little buddies have been they've targeted me in the past, and I will just say, oh yeah, they really have a thing for gay people, and I will just say, he's obviously homosexual. There's no, I mean,
how do you know?
Just everything about him screams repressed bottom. I mean, it's not even close.
Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. Okay, now everyone can see you, Brad. So first of all, how are you? Happy Thursday.
Yeah, dude. It's only Thursday. What a week.
Well, I think it's a happy Thursday for you because yesterday, and I'm just going to jump right into it, we got an awesome ruling by a U.S. federal court. This is a federal trade court specifically dealing with Trump's tariffs. And so today we brought Brad on to discuss some of those sort of like issues facing Republicans and some of the fissures that we're seeing. I think this is a perfect area to jump into. Brad, why don't you first tell us a little bit about yourself from my audience, and then also what's your take on this opinion?
Yeah, so for folks that don't know, I'm a center-right YouTuber and journalist. Come from kind of a free market, libertarian-ish background, consider myself more of a classical liberal these days, but yeah, I've been pretty outspoken against the Trump tariffs because I am a free market guy and because I think tariffs are bad. But there's two separate questions, right? There's tariffs as like an economic question, as a policy question on the merits. But then there's also the legality of the way that Trump is doing tariffs, because quite notably, like he didn't get Congress to pass a bill enacting tariffs, which Congress has done in years past. And is under the Constitution how it's supposed to work. The Constitution explicitly says Congress shall have the power to levy import taxes and duties and tariffs, not the president. It's under the power to tax, which is a Congress power. But there are some federal statutes that Congress has passed over the years that say, well, the president can impose some tariffs. We're giving him permission to do so in certain contexts and connotations. Trump basically like blew those federal statutes up and stretched them beyond imagination to just put baseline 10% tariffs on everyone and a bunch of other things, all in the names of these national emergencies. And now this was just struck down by this 3-judge panel that you mentioned. And to me, it's just like an obviously correct ruling. Even if you love tariffs, you can't do it like this. But now we're hearing about the judicial coup from the kind of far MAGA right about all these judicial activists. The cat turd MAGA account called called them commie judges.
Has he blocked you?
Yeah, it's laughable though. Cat turd called them commie judges. And the thing that I just have to say is, of the 3 judges, you have an Obama appointee, you have a Trump appointee, and a Reagan appointee. So today I learned that Trump appoints commie judges. Apparently, this is news to me because in the first Trump term, a lot of the traditional legal conservative types were ecstatic about how many Federalist Society members they got on the bench, but apparently they're actually commie judges if they rule against Trump, even if they're lifelong FedSoc members.
No, it's a great point, and I like how you kind of divided those issues up, because it is conceivable. I don't know how, but that you could have like a policy interest in favor of specific types of tariffs that Trump levied. But if you believe in the rule of law, and if you read this opinion, it's frankly absurd that anyone that we even acted like Trump could do this entire time. As you stated, the tariff power is delegated specifically to Congress, and there's this doctrine called the non-delegation doctrine. It doesn't have a lot of teeth in modern legal jurisprudence because basically courts have worked under the assumption, especially since the New Deal, that the Congress is going to protect and jealously its powers under Article 1, and so really unless there's like no intelligible principle and Congress seems to be purely abdicating its legislative authority, it's not really up for the courts to get into how much is too much and how much is too little. But this is such a case. Now I'm not going to say that the legal reasoning depended wholly on the non-delegation doctrine, but when you have those invocations that where the court is really wrestling like, well, if Congress really said that the president had unlimited tariff authority, okay, that is an area in which that would be an unconstitutional delegation. It seems like that was guiding some of the court's analysis, which is if the interpretation of Trump had to go, then effectively Congress would be delegating its whole tariff power, especially if you buy some of the reasoning like, well, he's just doing it to pressure the other countries. Well, that pressure rationale could apply to like literally any kind of tariff that you could impose. And that guided their analysis. And if you read it, it's remarkable that we're like reviving the non-delegation doctrine for the kind of stuff. But it's the kind of doctrine that we need at this point because, President Trump is willing to push any emergency authority that's been delegated. And courts, I'm sorry, I'll let you respond to this, but courts are loath to directly rule that we're not in an emergency situation, like override the president's determination of an emergency. But here, there were many ways for them to find that the plaintiffs were going to succeed, and they found at least a couple.
Yeah, and I get that they like to defer to the executive's declaration of an emergency, but there does have to be a limit to that because, for example, Trump's emergency that he cited for some of these tariffs is just the existence of trade deficits, which we've had for no, I'm not strawmanning. I'm not caricaturing that.
100%
they literally say the existence of persistent trade deficits is a national emergency, which makes no sense on the policy because trade deficits aren't even bad. But even if you think incorrectly, in my view, that trade deficits are bad for a country, I mean, we've had trade deficits for decades. It's not the kind of pressing, urgent thing that these emergency powers are intended for, where there's not necessarily time to get Congress together and pass a bill. I mean, this is like a 3-decade-long trend. You can't suddenly declare it's an emergency and then move forward with it. And so, I mean, they rested this on, I did something crazy because I covered this on my show my daily show, Brad versus Everyone podcast. I actually read this decision from this 3-judge court. It wasn't very long. I think most of the people tweeting about it right now didn't bother to read it, but Trump cited the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which has never been used to justify tariffs before. And he cited it to justify almost unlimited tariffs on almost all goods from almost every country. And all they said was that this law does not confer that degree of wide authority because it says that the powers in that law may only be exercised to deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat with respect to which a national emergency has been declared and can't be used for any other purpose. You just can't really claim that, like, oranges from Mexico are an extraordinary and unusual threat, or that trade deficits are.
Yeah, I think intuitively that makes sense to people, but who gets to declare that, right? I think that we would acknowledge that in the past we'd kind of just accepted that if there was a president in the executive branch and they had determined that there was a national emergency or a preemptive strike for a declaration of war, that they were acting in the best interest of the people in the United States and certainly would use discretion and professionalism and not just make stuff up. But now for the first time ever, we're starting to experience that, and I don't think we know how to do it. So if our government wants to survive as it is, I think the Supreme Court needs to step up and declare, Trump's declaration of war is unconstitutional, or Congress to step up and more clearly define what the president's role is in this.
They're actually quite usual. Now, maybe you don't like that, but still. And then what they also reached in this decision, and this is what you were getting at with the non-delegation doctrine, which I think should, if anything, be brought back with more of a punch, that if this statute did delegate the authority that Trump claims it does, they say it doesn't.
Yes. Right.
If the court says it doesn't, if it did, that would be unconstitutional, because you can't have Congress just give the president a power that's specifically given to them in the Constitution, right? We wouldn't accept that in any other situation. I mean, it's feckless and pathetic that they're even willing to do this, but that's the state of modern Congress. But that's not how it works. The same way that the president couldn't sign an executive order saying, now Congress will have the ability to vote and do pardons instead. You can't just like modify the Constitution like that.
A good example is like, so suppose that Congress like delegated the House of Representatives impeachment power, or the Senate's ability to try impeachments, to some kind of executive branch there. So yeah, I think it is true. And what Brad is saying is absolutely true. The court is using a canon of statutory construction known as the constitutional avoidance doctrine to say, we're going to assume the good faith of Congress, and we're going to assume that they didn't intend to pass a law that would be unconstitutional by the non-delegation doctrine. And by the way, there are other canons that also support the court's ruling here. For example, the legislative history. Some judges don't like to use legislative history, but here it's quite clear that the EPA, right, that was passed in response to like Nixon's overreach on certain tariffs that he was imposing at the time, and that they specifically crafted a statute that would like be different from this very broad wartime tariff statute. And it's actually we're getting really in the weeds now too, but the court didn't even find that the trade deficits weren't an unusual, and whatever the terminology that is that Brad cited, which is the correct terminology. They just said per se, right? They did find that with respect to the tariffs on the fentanyl stuff, those kinds of tariffs, they did not sort of meet that, or they did not directly address that issue. But they just said straight up that you can't consider trade deficits one of these unusual circumstances per se, that there's a separate statute, a separate provision that Congress provided for that any kind of trade imbalance would need to be addressed through those procedures, which puts like a cap on the total amount of duty and then a time limit on the total amount of duty. And so really on all fronts here, it was absurd that everyone was acting as though Trump could do this all the time, no matter what. And what Trump was arguing for, and it's funny, in court he was saying things like, well, don't worry, this legislation and the kind of limits that you've imposed here, Congress, they do matter because they stop Trump from himself. Trump can look to the guidelines in the statute, and he'll stop himself from conflicting with what Congress wanted. So that was a little funny, but yeah, no, people are definitely taking it out. They haven't read the opinion. You're right about that, especially the commentators on Twitter.
I will say though, it's interesting because I consider myself an independent these days, really. And so I was very critical of the Biden administration's abuses of executive power. I cheered when the courts struck down his attempt to unilaterally cancel student debt without an act of Congress. And in fact, in direct defiance of Congress, he tried to get them to pass one and they refused to. And he tried to do it via executive order, in a not too dissimilar way of citing old federal statutes that weren't intended for broad-based student loan cancellation, and it was struck down by the Supreme Court. I cheered, and so did Kat Turd, and so did Stephen Miller, and all these people. It wasn't a judicial coup then, and I don't think it's a judicial coup now, which is also funny because suddenly I'm seeing like MAGA types argue that courts can't block the will of the people and the people voted and yada yada yada, and I'm like, hold on, aren't the right side of the spectrum, aren't we we're a republic, not a democracy crowd?
Yeah,
right? Aren't we the crowd that doesn't think you get whatever you want just because 51% of people vote for it? Like, I I've always never supported the idea of direct democracy. I don't care if 60% of the public want a hate speech law. That's why we have a First Amendment. So they can't have that, right? These things are built in a counter-majoritarian way for a reason. And it's traditionally been progressives who bristle at that and don't like it,
100%,
and
yeah.
conservatives who defend it. And now, because it's their guy who won an election, they're like, the will of the people. I mean, did they say that judges are thwarting the will of the people when judges blocked Biden from canceling student debt? Because that's a popular policy. I disagree with it, but it's a popular policy.
It was a super popular policy, and for sure. Now, I'll take exception to what you said, and you probably knew I was going to take exception. I think the language with respect to the student loan case, and I'm just going to bring this up, we don't have to spend all the time on it, like, was at least arguable for Biden. Waive or modify any provision of this title. I mean, that is broad authority that Congress is saying you can waive or modify any provision of the Higher Education Act. There, I think at least Biden has an arguable statutory. I actually think.
So I think it would be. I think I don't want to get into a whole wormhole on it, but what I would say is I think the legislative intent did not indicate that you could do broad-based cancellation on that. But also, if they did, then I'd consider it an unconstitutional delegation.
Interesting.
And because it is the power of the purse, right? And it is. Biden specifically went to Congress and asked them to include student loan debt cancellation in legislation. They said no, and then he went and tried to do it anyway. So I agree that it's not as totally absurd as the tariff stuff, but I did think it was unconstitutional and unlawful. And for the purposes of this conversation, it's just important to note that no one had an issue on the right with judges blocking the will of the people then, because to some extent, that is the point of checks and balances, is to block the will of the people or the passions of a momentary majority. And conservative intellectuals and commentators are the ones who are like supposed to support that, and now suddenly they're against it. I mean, Biden did.
I would argue that those wanting to cancel student loan debt at the time were not a majority, they were in fact a very loud minority. From what I understood, most people were maybe not against it, but at the very least not very supportive of it. A lot of people coming out saying like, well, I never went to college. Why should my tax dollars pay for that? This is ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. I'm not okay with it. And even in my case, I have student loan debt, and but I was in a very good position after getting my degree to the point where I feel like I don't mind paying it off. I don't mind, you know what? I don't even mind giving back a little bit and supporting the future generation, but I don't know if that's necessarily best for the economy, especially if the government already subsidizes universities in such that they raise tuition fees constantly every year. Now, I guess my only point with that, though, is just I don't necessarily agree that it was a majority at the time. I would argue that it was not a majority, just a very loud minority.
Other things, his attempt at a vaccine or test mandate done via executive action, that was struck down by the Supreme Court. A ton of Biden's policies were struck down by the Supreme Court, and that wasn't a judicial coup. And as much as I was very critical of the Biden administration, they complied with those rulings. There's a misconception on the Republican right that Biden didn't comply with the Supreme Court ruling on the student loan case. Now, I was a huge critic. I wrote probably tens of thousands of words of the different programs, but he did comply with the ruling.
Yeah.
That program he shut down, and then he tried other avenues. That's not defiance of a Supreme Court ruling, but some MAGA people will tell you, well, Biden defied the Supreme Court on student loans. He did use some unfortunate language discussing it, where he said like the Supreme Court won't stop me. He really shouldn't have said it like that. But in action, he didn't defy the Supreme Court. He pursued his policy goals through a different avenue that was then further litigated. And the actual program the Supreme Court struck down, he didn't move forward with. So I do think that's an important point of clarification, because a lot of Republican or Trump supporter types, and it might just be X as kind of an extremist echo chamber, I don't know, but a lot of them seem to think that that happened in a way that it didn't actually take place. And I say that again as a huge critic of all of it.
No, I appreciate that. Listen, I'll resist the temptation to get into the weeds on the actual student loan issue because it is kind of a different issue, and the one that you're addressing is more the structural issue. And I appreciate you saying that he didn't defy the Supreme Court, because it's often, you know, pulling your hair to try to get people to acknowledge, no, I know that like what he said was bad, and this is like the same thing of like Biden with all of his gaffes, but really, you know, look at the different programs. They don't cover nearly as many people. They're not giving this broad universal relief. It's, you know, targeted with under different statutory authorities. One is like the save plan. So yeah, I really appreciate that you have dug into the weeds and you know that difference. So I appreciate that. And instead of focusing on the actual student loan comparison, I do actually want to focus on what's happening to the party, your old party, and some of the fissures that have emerged within the party. I guess I'll start first on, rather than the rule of law point, which I think you've kind of explained well. Let's talk about the tariff policy in general. And I think it's a great example because it brings to some of the rationales that the administration itself provides seem as schizophrenic, or where there's cognitive dissonance, as the different interests behind, or the different parties that compose the Republican Party today. So talk a little bit about, well, what is behind this tariff policy? Is it all corruption? Is there some there? And how does it help explain the differences or you know, fractures within the party today?
Well, I keep seeing these memes, and obviously memes oversimplify stuff, but to some extent they can also capture untruth. And I keep seeing these memes of Trump where it's like Trump announces tariffs, and then it's like the MAGA person, art of the deal. Then it's like Trump cancels tariffs, art of the deal. Or it's like Trump announces tariffs, creating jobs, and then it's like Trump cancels tariffs,
Roads lead to
creating
Rome.
jobs.
It was hilarious, and I'm sure when you read it, to see the court like summarize all of the shit that was happening with the tariffs and their increases, and then so just seeing that play out in real time, it in a court document, it really was watching that meme over and over. But sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no, of course. But I think it gets to a fundamental divide in the GOP, because the GOP used to be a fusionistic Reaganite party where one of the planks was, at least in the ideological core, of course, their politicians didn't always enforce this or follow through on it, was some commitment to free markets and free trade and limited government and fiscal conservatism. But there's been this crack up that represents where there's a new wave of kind of populist nationalism. Stephen Miller agrees far more with Bernie Sanders on economics than he does with Ronald Reagan. Steve Bannon agrees far more with like old school left-wing economics than he does. Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, is a longtime Democrat who supports like tax the rich, very left-wing economic policies. So he's just a worlds away from a free market Republican type. Yeah, but there are some people in the administration who still, I think of like a Scott Bessent, for example, the Treasury Secretary, is probably at his heart, given his background, more of a free trade, free markets guy. And in fact, some of his comments before joining the administration suggest that he knows a lot of the criticisms of the tariffs to be true, and has, for whatever reason, maybe he thinks he can do damage control on the inside. I don't know, but he's decided to join the clown car. I can't understand that decision, but whatever, that's kind of an aside. So there is this internal tug of war between free market conservative types, you know, the people who agree with the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Those types had a lot more control and play in the first Trump administration, because when you think of the Trump 1.0 policies, which honestly I agreed with probably a majority, I probably disagreed with maybe 30%. They cut corporate taxes, cut personal taxes, deregulated the economy in a whole host of ways. And they still spent a lot of money and ran deficits, unfortunately. But then they were small-scale tariffs on specific goods. There wasn't and I think those tariffs were harmful, but they were contained enough that they didn't derail the economy. And so prior to COVID-19, which was kind of a black swan event, and we could talk about how Trump didn't handle it amazingly, but prior to that, the economy was actually in a very good place in Trump 1.0, and the policy regime was traditionally kind of free market-esque, more or less. Around the edges, you could quibble. This time, I think the nationalists and populists, this administration, are basically in charge, and the policies are incoherent. They're all over the place. There's simultaneously some stuff that seems almost engineered, almost intended to be more kind of that old free market type, but then there's like the 10% flat tariff. There's the policy
Lot more
rules,
pipes.
regulations, and we're going to bully businesses and tell them what prices they have to charge and all sorts of other things. And I just really don't have any idea what it is that Republicans actually stand for or believe. I mean, there's a few through lines I can still identify, but really a coherent ideology or principles underlying a lot of this stuff is hard to identify for me these days, increasingly.
No, I appreciate that. And for me as well, it does seem like a different faction is in charge this time. I will note that, well, two things. The first is the way in which Trump, a lot of his policies start to mirror, I don't know, they remind me of like a communist command economy style situation where, for example, I'm sure you don't agree with a lot of the price caps on goods that they're that he's just like floating out there. He's
well, when he yelled at Amazon because Amazon was going to add the tariff prices, and he's like, "You do not do that."
Yes, and also he's like yelling at Apple. He's like, do not pass the cost on to the consumers of the tariffs that I'm imposing. So he feels like a communist. He's like going into the schools or to universities to like command and control what the universities are going to say. So a lot of the policies of the Trump administration 2.0 seem like directed at coercing private conduct to be more nationalistic, to be more, and it really is approaching I don't know, some level of almost leftist populist nationalists in some cases, I would say, or they resemble them. Now, I don't think the leftists are happy for some other reasons, and I think that there are differences, but there are aspects of that where I see it and I'm like, yeah, Brad's gonna hate this. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, well, of course. And yeah, to be clear, like the Trump administration is not like a left-wing administration.
Yeah,
There's tons of things where they're not. But on some of this economics and the role of government stuff, if you're describing politics in like a big government, small government way, I mean, they're way on the big government side. It's not a coincidence that some of the biggest cable news defenders of the Trump administration are like self-avowed former Marxists and lefties. That's not a joke. I mean, I'm referring to Batya Ungar-Sargon, who to be clear, I'm personally friends with. I think she's a lovely person. I just disagree with her on almost every issue. She's a self-professed Marxist a few years ago even, and now she's like the strongest champion for Trump's policies. In a different era, that would be unfathomable for the Republican Party, but it's kind of not now. Peter Navarro, the guy who Trump listens to for his trade policy advice, not only publishes books where he cites fake economists that are just him by a fake name.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. That's a real thing. People can look it up. He's also like economic progressive. He basically agrees with like Bernie Sanders on economics. And I strongly don't, but I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
here.
no,
It's just like the through line isn't there anymore. I don't know what's going on. And you end up with ironically, for the drain the swamp people, when you have the government doing this, it becomes a matter of who has the best lobbyists, who has the best connections. I mean, I'll give you an example that I actually personally disagree with, but I find kind of insane. The TikTok ban, right?
Yeah.
I disagreed with banning TikTok, but Congress passed a law banning TikTok. The President of the United States signed it into law, and the Supreme Court upheld it as constitutional. And yet Trump has just said, because he is well connected to a TikTok donor, and because people like him on TikTok now, he thinks, at least, that's not my experience, but maybe I'm just not on that side of TikTok. I'm more plugged into like the woke crazy people on TikTok, but he's just choosing to not enforce that law. And the law only contained one provision allowing for a delay, and only under certain conditions that weren't actually met. But even then, maybe you give him the first delay. He's delayed it twice now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just not
And he didn't do the
doing
delay the right way as well. No,
he didn't. He didn't. But even if you're going to give him the first one, to be as charitable as possible, the second delay is just totally legally illegitimate. Like he's just not doing the law. And why? Again, it's just because of Jeff Yass's money, partially, one of the major owners of TikTok, being a huge Trump funder, and then like people he likes telling him don't do it. But it's like you're supposed to, you swore to faithfully uphold and execute the laws of the land. And this, I was an opponent of it. I didn't support this ban, but he should enforce the law, and like that's insane to not do. It's flown under the radar, actually.
And he wipes his ass with his oath, and you're absolutely correct. That law was passed in a bipartisan fashion. Trump was the initial one of the major
he flipped on it.
Who was pushing for it in the first place. Biden ends up signing it into law, unanimously upheld as not a violation of the First Amendment in any respect by the Supreme Court of the United States. And just now not enforcing it whatsoever. That I think is an example, of Trump just not giving a shit. And it's even more ironic given the tariff rationale, where he's being so punitive to China, so antagonistic to China. You think that following
but not
the
banning
law, but their own thing. Yeah,
I mean, again, I didn't support the ban, but like if you're going to say that something is a national security threat, I feel like you have a better argument for TikTok than you do for like every imported good in the world. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like the national security threat of advanced technology and data gathering is probably more significant than like apparel.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's just another instance here where up is down, down is up. The policy I was going to push to, and I think it's going to help us transition into the next topic I wanted to talk to you about, was Medicaid. You had Josh Hawley from the Senate, senator from Missouri. That's right? Missouri.
Yeah, he's Missouri.
Yeah. Came out and said, be very careful, Republicans, because we have a new base now. And that new base relies heavily on Medicaid. And there's the new kind of like working class Trump coalition. We have to remember like that base is going to be highly affected by things like Medicaid. And he's kind of giving the game away a little bit. And I think ultimately we're still going to have a lot of significant Medicaid cuts. But that I think puts squarely in division this new bill, this budget reconciliation process. And when I was thinking about it and thinking about who to talk to about this, yesterday I talked to some schizo person and she didn't really know what the hell was going on with the bill. It was not. She thought that when we were talking about balancing the budget, that it referred to some like metaphysical balance, like it's going to help us balance each other. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm going to put the video up.
All right, so just on that, before we get into this, streamers do this a lot, and I'm not shading you at all, but like the TikTok live debate bros or whatever, the Deans, the Parkers, the they're talking on TikTok live, and they're talking to people who have no idea about anything. And to me, that's kind of like the left-wing streamer equivalent of Charlie Kirk debating 18-year-old non-binary people and like owning them because he's a professional political analyst who knows more than they do. So it's easy.
Brad,
I find it kind of lame.
Listen, in defense of me, I'm going to defend myself in two ways. Well, first, I put out a call on Twitter. I want to talk to someone who's willing to defend this bill. And two, I didn't know that she thought that like the person I was bringing on was not going to know what balancing the budget meant. Oh my God, hang on a second. Balancing I think I need to upgrade to Pro live to Zoom. So just give me. I think I'm going to upgrade to Pro. Okay. So just give me 1 second. Wait 1 second. Be right back, folks. All right, so you can still be heard, but I just need to upgrade to Pro real quick. I did not know I needed to do
no,
this.
my face has gone missing.
Yeah.
No, I don't even mean to shade you with that. That's just my complaint. And listen, I make fun of crazy people on TikTok and do other stuff where it's like you're not engaging with the smartest version of the other side. I understand. But I just would find it more interesting. And I've in the last few weeks, I've tried to reach out to people to host debates and conversations on my channel. And interestingly, I've gotten crickets from a lot of the right-wing media folks who constantly wanted me on their shows or wanted to collaborate me or work with me during the Biden administration when I was a huge critic of most things about Biden and Harris. And interesting how that works. But even some of the left-wing types that I've tried to get involved with, I don't really want to talk to me either, it seems, because I think it's just easier to like talk to some Trump supporter who thinks that, like, I don't know, Marxists have taken over their every kindergartner in the country and all
It's easier to have your cake and eat it too.
5-year-old, and
So just
I don't
do
know,
that.
just like I see these clips of them talking to these Trump supporters, and I'm like, listen, these are not representative Trump supporters, and they're not like equals to you, right? If you're a smart political commentator, influencer who does this full time, talking to randos on TikTok live, I get that it's like fun content, but I would hope you would also be open to debating smart people, or at least people who are professionals.
No, I totally agree with that, to be clear. And that's why I am, I love bringing people on who are like the quote cream of the crop. I'm talking to Viva. Do you know who Viva Frey is?
From Twitter, yeah, I know. I recognize that name from Twitter.
The thing is, he's a full-time influencer, right? But even like the cream of the crop of the Trumpy people, when they're debating, I was on Tim Pool a second time. Oftentimes, it really feels like it's tongue-in-cheek. Sorry, I just fixed the Zoom thing, so just give me 1 second, real quick, to transition back. So we have unlimited time now. I just paid for Zoom.
Wow, I'm honored.
Yeah, you should be. Fucking honored. Okay, cool. And then we do this transition, and the meeting's being transcribed. I don't need the meeting to be transcribed. Okay, transition. Cool. All right, we're good. Yeah, no. And the problem I feel like is oftentimes the most prominent voices aren't necessarily the quote unquote most serious. And we'll get into this, I think, at the end of this of our little segment here about our power rankings of some of these MAGA influencers. But who would you consider like the intellectual class of the of MAGA influencer?
That's fine.
And like, are they willing to debate? Like, are the Stephen Millers aren't debating, right? The ideological.
Well, Stephen Miller's a little different because he's literally the deputy White House chief of staff. So I don't really expect him to be like hopping in TikTok lives or hopping on Twitch streams. But I mean, he does television interviews and other stuff where he gets challenged. I agree with you. I mean, to some extent, you try to find the sweet spot of people with big audiences who are notable, who also, are somewhat intelligent or have some command and aren't just total grifters. People that I look to tend to be people who are like mostly Trump. So you look at and I don't agree with them on a whole host of things, but you look at like an Eric Erickson or a Ben Shapiro, and I think because 5 or 10% of the time they will break with Trump, I can take their arguments defending him much more seriously. Whereas there's some people like the Benny Johnsons of the world who I would debate, but he's just so unserious. Like Trump could do anything and he would just twist himself in a pretzel to support it. So I understand that struggle.
Did you see the Kamala crash comparison where before when there was that bad? Yeah,
I played that on my show.
Oh, so
that's what I mean.
So delicious. Can you explain that for the audience?
Yeah. So when the stock market crashed after Kamala was made the nominee, Benny went on his show and talked about how terrible this was and how Americans were having their finances ruined. And then when Trump did his whole trade war thing, I think, and the tariffs plummeted, he literally went on his show and was like, "You don't need money. Struggle and scraping by builds character." And I'm like, dude, how do you look yourself in the mirror? Because what I don't even understand about that is you don't even have to do that. You know what I mean? To keep your MAGA audience, to get clicks, to get views. You don't have to degrade yourself that much. I don't think they were asking for that. Were they?
I think that there's a way, even among Shapiro, even among the people who supposedly they have more reputation to give up or whatever, they can't ever directly go against the master. There's a way of criticizing Trump where I don't like what his advisor is telling him. I don't think this will be good for him, where it doesn't undermine the underlying character of the president. But what does Benny Johnson offer for his commentary other than being a pure sycophant? What is his value add beyond Trump? And I'm skeptical if there's anything there, that if he knows, right, that his entire audience is premised on being in the good graces of MAGA. And so you're never going to get a critical take from Benny Johnson or indeed someone like Jack Posobiec. Because what are they outside of Trump world?
I mean, smart marketers,
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, they do something well in terms of drawing massive eyeballs. And there's a lot of people who try to do what they do and it doesn't work. So they have to have some
Right.
sort of insight
Missing
into the
one.
zeitgeist among MAGA or into digital. I would say, like, Benny Johnson, he is a serial plagiarist, by the way. Like, that just goes under the radar. He was fired from a bunch of jobs for literally just stealing people's work. So
Is
he's
he a
always been
BuzzFeed
kind of
guy?
yeah, he's the
Yeah.
one who got fired by BuzzFeed for just stealing people's articles. So he's always been kind of a laughingstock in serious media and journalism. But you don't do those kinds of numbers on YouTube and build that kind of digital audience empire without doing something right strategically. It might not be like moral or honest or have integrity, but they clearly do have some sort of skill set that lends to that I honestly somewhat try to learn from and try to emulate, because part of my goal is to reach more people and build an audience and then steer them more in the direction of my beliefs. But I guess I'm not willing to go so far as that. And honestly, I feel slightly what you just described. I wasn't quite as much as you described, but like in the first Trump term, I would say I still have a lot of followers who voted for Trump and who lean Trump and lean Republican. But in the first Trump term, I did more of what you were saying, where I was saying, like, Trump is making a mistake here, and this isn't truly MAGA, or this isn't truly, going to put America first.
No
I
true
just did a lot
Scotsman.
more of the tap dancing. This time around, I just don't give a fuck anymore. Like, it's so much worse than I thought. It's so extreme. He's setting so many precedents that are going to come back to haunt the right. He's just setting the stage for the next Democrat, ignoring court rulings, revoking people's visas over their opinions, all sorts of things that I think a President AOC would take and run with, or a president, whoever, Jasmine Crockett, God forbid. But it's just so, and I don't have the access, like, because I've never been a full Trump supporter. I don't have the incentive to, like,
All right.
I wouldn't
Get this
anyway. I
last
don't
pipe.
have the incentive to kiss the ring and just defend the thing of the day, because no matter what, like, I'm not invited to the influencer briefing. Right? I tried to get in, they won't let me in.
You
Like,
didn't get the Epstein files binder. That is
Oh
one
my
area
God.
where even the crazy person I talked to yesterday. Now I don't know if this is true, but where there is this like anti-Epstein attitude and like this conspiracy attitude, where they're pretty, or at least they say they're really pissed that they haven't gotten the real story from the Department of Justice yet, and that's how usually.
but like, hold on. Of all their conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
I don't know very much about it. Is
Yeah.
that the craziest one? I don't think it is.
I don't think it's the craziest conspiracy. What I mean to say is they are thinking that there's like a very, very intricate plot that they're waiting to get, and they can't understand.
Like, some of them have
and
gone
rationalize.
against Cash Patel and
Right,
Dan
exactly.
Bongino, because once they went in to be in charge of the FBI, they looked at the files and they're like, wait, there's no scandal here. And people think they're like compromised now.
Yes,
I think
yes.
it's probably just more likely that there isn't anything there. But I still, with the Epstein thing, it's not it's not like QAnon, right? Like, the suicide is sus, and he did have a lot of powerful connections. Like,
including Trump. I wholeheartedly
They're all full?
agree that there
Okay.
is it is super sus as hell. All I'm trying to say is that's one area in which their mind has been so primed by even the people now in charge of the FBI, who are telling you nothing to see here, folks. That's one area where I find that the dam
yeah,
breaks
when
a
they
little
did the
bit.
binders,
Yeah.
I actually saw a lot of MAGA people criticizing
Yeah.
the Trump administration over that. So
Okay.
you're right.
Maybe
I
my
mean, it's not
pumps
like
are
they'll
backwards.
literally I think they'll defend something. It's hard to parse exactly what is and what isn't. I think they would
Yes,
defend
you gotta
almost
flip them.
anything in the name of owning the libs. But on something like that, where it's like an intra-MAGA issue, they are still willing to criticize Trump, I guess, which
Yeah.
I guess is better than nothing. But
It's few and far between issues, and it's one that I push on a lot
There we go.
when I have someone like, why did they release the Epstein files? Presupposing that there is, because obviously they're working under that assumption as well. But I do want to. That was an interesting little side rail, and I'm glad we did it. But I want to get back into the big beautiful bill, because how I brought
Now
that
we're
up was
making
Josh
plastic
Hawley
again.
coming out and saying Medicaid's very important. And I talked to this person yesterday who was unable really to fully understand what's in the bill, or even what a government deficit is or a budget is, and it was pretty tough. But as I was thinking of who to talk to, I think you came up
defenses
with
up
my
here
mind. I'm
just
like,
in case.
there's going to be things on here that he probably agrees. They're extending and deepening the Trump tax cuts. They're cutting some parts of the government that you probably don't like and that I probably do like. And so give me your assessment. But at the same time, I'm like, but this is a bomb to the deficit. Is he going to think like Thomas Massey, that this is wholly irresponsible and should not be passed? So the first question I'll ask you, and I will be direct about it, is if this bill, as President Palumbo, was in front of your desk, would you sign it? Number one. And two, give me your just general thoughts.
Oh, I would hold it up to the camera, pick up a lighter and light it on fire. And I would shut down the government before signing such a betrayal of everything that we say we stand for as fiscally conservative Republicans. I mean, there's things in it I like, to be absolutely very clear. I want to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, big parts of it at least. I want the expensing provisions for business and investment. Part of the problem with like a 2,000-page bill is there's going to be really good stuff in there that, I mean, there's even stuff in there that like Democrats would support or like. But then
like
what they do is they hold you hostage. And if you vote against it, they'll say, you voted against this provision for like health insurance for kids or for veterans benefits or something. My response to that, because if I was a politician, I never will be for this reason, I just wouldn't care about staying in their good graces or getting elected, is to tell them to F off. I think this bill, there is no ifs, ands, or buts. The exact number, the estimates aren't going to be 100% accurate. You're talking about multiple trillions of dollars added to the deficit over a decade, potentially as high as 5.5 trillion I've seen. I mean, that's like one of the biggest additions to the national debt of any single bill of all time. It's bigger than all, like, multiple massive COVID bills. I was against a lot of them.
Bigger than any of the Biden spending packages. Bigger than any of those. It's so funny. Sorry to interrupt, but it's funny because you said 5.5 is one of the estimates. I brought up, I said it to this woman yesterday. I was like, it's anywhere between 2.5, whichever estimate, 2.5 and 5 billion. And she's like, no, it's not 5 billion. It's trillion. It's 4 trillion, not 5 trillion. I'm like, who the fuck cares? That's bigger than anything that the Democrats passed under their tenure. And it's
massive.
not costed at all. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and there's also just an absurd gaslighting about it all. Like Stephen Miller is out there saying, and Caroline Leavitt is out there saying, this bill doesn't add to the deficit. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, don't insult my intelligence. Don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. If you want to tell me that, listen, we want to extend the tax cuts and Congress won't sign equivalent spending cuts, so this is the only way to do it. Okay, I guess. I still wouldn't support it, but at least be honest that, like, okay, we want to cut spending, but Congress won't pass a bill that cuts spending significantly. But don't just like lie. Like, they're assuming when they rig the numbers in the Council of Economic Advisors, which is no longer a serious thing, they put like 5.5% GDP growth into the equation, or something insane, totally unrealistic to say that, the economy will be roaring and grow so much that the revenues will add up. And also there's just a lot of either misunderstanding or dishonesty about how this stuff works. And I covered economics for years as a policy correspondent. That was one of my first jobs in journalism, was specifically covering economic policy news. And Stephen Miller is out here saying keeping tax rates at what they are currently at can't add to the deficit. This is totally misinformation by the CBO. That is idiocy. Under current law, the Trump 1.0 tax cuts, some of them were made temporary. So they only go for a certain year, and then the tax code goes back to what it was. So under current law, tax rates are set to go up. We have projections about what revenue will be. They're not 100% accurate, of course, but I mean, they're in the ballpark of true. And then if you pass a bill specifically lowering the rates from current law, you're going to have a lot less tax revenue. Now, some people are like, well, cutting taxes can sometimes mean more revenue. And I'm like, okay, Art Laffer, that's true when the tax rate... That's true when the tax rate is 95%, right? Like,
if you explain the Laffer curve to the audience so that people understand your joke?
The Laffer curve, it's like a free market idea by a free market economist, Art Laffer, and it's true, but only in a very certain context. That if you have the idea is that higher tax rates can sometimes mean less revenue. If you have a 100% income tax that will get less revenue for the government than a 30% income tax, because at 100% income tax, nobody would work if literally every dollar just went to taxes. In the same way, you might have a situation where if you had 70% income taxes and you cut them to 40%, you actually end up with more revenue because people work more. That's the idea behind the Laffer curve. And I think there are some contexts where it's true. This just isn't one of them, right? Like we're talking about the top marginal tax rate going from 37 to 39, or the corporate tax rate from like 21 up to 30. So we're not in that situation. And there's no credible, serious economist who can tell you these tax changes won't add trillions to the deficit. So I just don't like the gaslighting of it all. That's what bothers me. And then I view this kind of deficit spending as fundamentally immoral. I view it as intergenerational theft. Essentially, you want to enjoy things today, but then pass the bill on to your kids and grandkids to pay the interest payments and have the economic ramifications of it for the rest of your life. I'm not a balanced budget amendment person. I want some sort of fixed balanced budget amendment. So like you have to even it out over 10 years or something, because I understand that during a recession, you're going to want to run a budget deficit. But I just think that then you should have to run a surplus in 2 years or whenever, so that it evens out over time. But this idea that you're going to just enjoy trillions of dollars of benefits, but then stick the costs to people who aren't even born yet, to me is immoral. I mean, imagine what would we think of parents who took out a credit card in their kid's name, paid for a bunch of stuff for themselves, and then when they turned 18, that the kids get to start making the payments when the parents are like in the retirement home and no longer working. Obviously, I know that the federal government's finances isn't the same as your personal finances, is true, but some principles apply that can be compared. And Republicans are supposed to get that. Trump has said over and over again, he would balance the budget. He's going to get rid of the deficit, all this BS that was never true. And I just think I actually care about this stuff. I think it's a betrayal, and a lot of it's like dumb stuff. Like they're literally including, I despise the SALT deduction. I think it should be nuked into earth. But they're including this tax loophole. So to explain SALT for people who don't know, SALT is a provision of the federal tax code that gives you a write-off on your federal taxes if you have high state and local taxes. So it particularly benefits people that live in like New York or California or Connecticut. And within that, it particularly benefits wealthy people who live in those states.
Because they itemize their deductions and they're able to actually take advantage of the SALT provision here. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And because they have higher marginal tax rates at the state level, like California has, I think, gradated income taxes and that kind of thing. But so the SALT basically lets you write off your state and local taxes on your federal taxes, but it's an incoherent idea. If you as California or New York decide you want X level of benefits, you have to have X level of taxes. And no one else is getting those benefits, so why should you get a discount on your share of the federal taxes because of it? To me, it makes no sense, especially from a fiscally conservative perspective, because what you're essentially doing is subsidizing and encouraging the growth of state and local government without them having to bear the full cost.
We would say it encourages progressive tax regimes in various different states. And I think one of the great marketing tools of getting rid of it for Trump was, well, this is just helping the rich in blue states. And people, and
which
it
is
was
kind of true.
It is, I guess, kind of true, but it also is. I believe the way in which it benefits, if you support those kinds of progressive tax policies, is it prevents this wealth flight that all the people going to Florida, everyone going elsewhere. So it is, even among its ardent supporters, either a completely provincial policy, and that's what the New York SALT people are, it's just to benefit their constituents, and so it's because it's just like a net benefit, or it's to encourage progressive tax schemes, which I think is why I like
obviously
it.
Republicans
and Republicans should not encourage. Right? Yeah. But go ahead. So sorry. But that's the policy rationale by some people.
It's a special tax carve out that they are like quadrupling after they smartly reduced it in Trump's first tax bill
to 40,000 from 10,000.
Yeah, that overwhelmingly benefits well-off people in blue states. So it's like, even from the Trump perspective, something like that makes absolutely no sense other than as like a corrupt bargaining tool to these New York Republican lawmakers who I guess you could say are representing their constituents, but are just, I mean, pushing something that's like manifestly unfair and violates basic rules of tax fairness and isn't remotely fiscally conservative. So they're blowing up the deficit while including all sorts of like crap in it, like this massive tax loophole. So they're not even doing everything they can to minimize the impact on the deficit. It's like, no, they're just throwing it all together in this massive bill. I also hate that, and this isn't a Trump thing, they just do this now. I hate the whole omnibus practice, right?
Oh,
These
yeah.
2,000-page bills. Call me quaint, but I think we should go back to the days where they voted on the different agencies and programs one by one. They would do, a DoD budget markup that would go through, committee and then the general vote and all this. And you want to talk about Doge, which I think turned out to be kind of a joke, and I don't want to get into that, but like, doing it all at once like this is how wasteful stuff gets through and how corrupt stuff gets through, because they have, I think, 72 hours to go through these 2,000-page bills now.
Well, yeah, they passed it. They passed it in the middle of the night, and Republicans used to like blow a gasket over the supposed like, wow, the middle of the night bill. They're trying to sneak it before anyone has a chance to read.
Well, they were right. I think they were right to blow that gasket, but now they're doing the same thing.
And no one wants to read it or anything, or no one cares that they're trying to just pass it quickly. I wonder. I think that some version of this is going to pass. There's too much pressure, I think, from Trump, but I actually don't know if there is concerted resistance in the Senate. Which faction is going to win out? Is it going to be the fiscal hawks, the deficit hawks? Is it going to be the people? And we should get into this because this is probably the most sensitive of where our disagreements might lie. Although I don't know, it will be the Medicaid stuff. The Republicans who can't stomach humongous Medicaid cuts, which this is proposing. Something like $800 billion in cuts. This work requirement is another area where I think the kind of the Doge efficiency stuff, like you're now proposing an additional
Maybe what
work
I actually
requirement
need
on
is a faster
Medicaid,
belt,
which is obviously going to increase, a bureaucratic red tape. It's going to increase, I think, inefficiencies. I don't think it's going to significantly decrease unemployment. But I wonder which of the factions is going to win out. And if they get rid of SALT, because the Senate Republicans do not like SALT at all. They don't like that cap at all. Are you going to be able to keep on board these moderate, Republicans, the, Mike Lawlers of the world? So I don't
New
know
York
which
crowd and them.
Before I ask you about Medicaid, do you have a sense, if you had to guess who's going to win out, what the final version of this might look like if it comes to pass? What's your sense in the Senate?
Well, I think it might not pass in the Senate. I mean, at least not in its current form, because that's the nice thing about the Senate, again, is the counter-majoritarian force. These guys aren't up for re-election every 2 years, so they have a little bit more insulation, making them able to push back on somebody like Trump. So I've already seen Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, and others saying, hell no, dead on arrival, we're not voting for this. And unless some Democrats cross over, or they convince, which I find very unlikely and implausible, or they convince a couple of these holdout Republicans somehow. I mean, it could not. Or what could honestly happen is they change it in significant ways that then it can't pass the House. Like they get rid of SALT, they, sunset some of the tax cuts, like they reduce the deficit impact, they do a bunch of stuff and they send it back. And then maybe, and this touches on the Medicaid thing, because like maybe Josh Hawley holds out to not cut as much from Medicaid. I don't know. And then it goes back to the House and it can't pass. I mean, this is part of the problem with they have very razor thin majorities and they have very little uniting beliefs anymore. I mean, you end up in a pretty dysfunctional place. It will, I guess, become a test of how much punch does Trump still have? How afraid of him are people actually anymore? I think the House will ultimately be much more likely to be bullied into submission by Trump's whatever Trump wants. So if the Senate modifies it significantly in ways the House doesn't like, Trump might be able to bully the House into passing it anyway, because they're all just constantly up for re-election and scared of a primary challenge.
And that will
the
almost,
Senate,
certainly be
by design is not.
Yeah. it'll be a less fiscal destructive bill, I assume, coming out of the Senate, although, who knows with the Medicaid stuff. So let's not belabor it anymore. Elephant in the room, Medicaid, thoughts?
Honestly, I haven't been focused on that aspect of the legislation, so I'm almost not even prepared to discuss it. I would have to look into it more. I've just been talking about the deficit impact and the tax cuts.
And that's enough for you?
I guess, to me, it's like it's a non-starter. If you're a fiscal conservative, how are you going to support a bill that's going to add 3 to 5 trillion to the debt? Like, it's a non-starter for me. And so the Medicaid thing, I don't know. It's a whole can of worms. I would need to to read about it more. I think it is indisputable that Medicaid has morphed into something much bigger than it was ever intended to be, and that people are now covered by Medicaid who are not the traditional single mom with multiple children, or indigent people who are essentially able-bodied adults with incomes significantly above the poverty line who just can't afford healthcare because it's so freaking expensive for so many other reasons, that the healthcare system is so broken and so complicated. Yeah, I guess I almost am not even really prepared to get into it.
No worries.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, I expected the first take from you, and I'm glad that I was able to. And that's one thing, by the way, that I think people should be predictable in that, or at least somewhat predictable on some of the stuff in ways that I think like Trump is not necessarily predictable. But I find it comforting that there are at least some influencers who you can kind of predict where they're going to lie on certain things. And so I'm glad that that when you said that you're going to burn it, that I'm like, yep, that's Brad. By the way,
yeah, I mean, it's almost a sign of like. I mean, you don't want to be totally ideologically predictable because you don't want to be a blind ideologue. But it's almost a sign of some sort of corruption or just going with the flow or like following the crowd if you're not predictable, because you should have principles that you stand for. And I have like maybe 3 things I've stood for. One of them is free market capitalism. One of them is free speech. And under free market capitalism is fiscal conservatism. So like, if you can't predict that I'm going to oppose adding trillions to the deficit and oppose people like being thrown in vans for writing op-eds critical of Israel, I agree that a lot of people who said they believe those things are now apologizing for those things. But like, that's to me a massive red flag of their actual integrity or principles. People should be more or less predictable if you have a value set that is coherent and consistent. Obviously, you don't want to be like a predictable in the sense of, oh, well, we know he's going to defend whatever Trump does, but predictable in terms of like a mathematical sense that, okay, like this person is a socialist, so of course they're going to support X, Y, or Z socialist policy, or this person is, a fiscal hawk, so of course they're going to support this. This person is a non-interventionist, so of course they're going to be opposed to this. This person is a hawk, so of course they're going to want this. It's like, if you're not, then how are you even deciding things if it's not based on philosophy? You're just like, what? Holding your finger up and trying to catch which way the wind is blowing. Like, that's not how this is supposed to work. Sometimes, sorry, I know I'm babbling a lot.
No, you're good.
I used to get the question asked to me when I was working in conservative media. People like haters who didn't like a criticism I had of a Republican would be like, how does this help Republicans get elected? Or like, how does this help us beat the Democrats? And I'm like, you and I have very fucking different ideas of what my job is as a political commentator and journalist. Like, I'm not a partisan operative, and I've never wanted to be. So I've always thought my job is to say the truth as I see it and say what I think is correct. And people can agree, they can disagree, but it's never been my concern whether this helps Republicans or will lose us a seat or anything like that. And so people have a warped view on the right, and I can't speak to as much how progressive media works, though I do know that some of the Biden stuff, why didn't they want to report on it? Definitely some partisan affiliations there. But like, that is not how media and journalism is supposed to work. You shouldn't be putting partisan considerations. You should just be trying to do your job. And obviously you can have an ideological bias, but not really supposed to be like openly partisan. Hot take, I guess.
No, I hear you on that. On the Biden stuff, I think you're referring to like the mental competency stuff. And on that, I think the Jake Tapper revelations or interviews or whatever, I think are more properly calibrated. Though I think that there are some complicit members in the media are more properly calibrated to the administration itself, and specifically his inner circle and some of his advisors, where I think there are some pretty shocking moments, at least as alleged in this like media tour by Jake Tapper that I certainly wasn't aware of. Although I don't think that there's like this wide spanning media conspiracy in the sense that people were reporting on Biden's cognitive health. It was a major issue.
But they were very viciously, some of them were very viciously attacked for it. If you look at like Alex Thompson at Axios, the way when he was first talking about it, the dog pile from other journalists was.
Well, I saw it of Robert Hur. I saw it of Robert Hur. So I defended Robert Hur. People will see me on the record. I went through the Hur report. I defended her on mentioning the cognitive issues, and I attacked Democrats who were being super unfair to Robert Hur in real time, contemporaneously during those hearings. I thought it was absolutely absurd. So no, I hear you. There's definitely some sniping taking place of even Democratic people, or even people who are supposed to be, above above this kind of partisanship, like a prosecutor. Although that it's a quaint notion right now. But so no, I definitely hear you on that. I think that there is something there. But I don't see it as this kind of, there's someone I talked to called Rob Noor who kind of alleges that even the Twitch people, even the down to the, everyone could see the cognitive decline was fully apparent, and you were still blah, 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 blah. I think that there are specific instances of quote unquote cover-ups and of unfair conduct that don't rise to the level of like, everyone was in on the same nature of a cover-up. I think in some cases it's like a partisan blinders. In some cases it's going with the flow. And in some cases it's an outright just not having a cabinet meeting for a year, not telling it to the American people that this guy isn't having cabinet meetings at all. So I see very different levels of complicity.
Let's talk about this a little bit, though, because I agree you can't speak about the mainstream media as a monolith. I know I do sometimes, and people do, but there were people asking tough questions. However, there were a lot of people who, like, for example, in the book, Tapper and others are talk about how, like, well, the administration lied to us. And it's like, well, the point is that if it was the Republican administration, you wouldn't have accepted their answers at face value. You would have been much more hardcore in terms of pressing on it. And then there was sort of a bias and groupthink among journalists. I mean, do you remember the concept of a cheap fake?
I do remember the concept of a cheap fake. That's right.
So the idea is there's something called a deep fake, which is a fake video.
It's a fake
and
video.
then, but of course, the videos that were being shared of Biden weren't fake. I mean, there are some, but like many of them are
zoomed
real.
in and like adjusted to the allegation was by the people using this concept to exaggerate in what was otherwise a normal interaction. There were a couple times this happened though, Brad, right? There were a couple times in which this happened where they were zooming in when he was clearly like looking at an officer or something or talking to someone.
There are a couple times, but they used this to just like dismiss a lot of the evidence. I can tell you this because I was on TV and I was talking about this at the time in 2020, 2021, and 2022, before this became like okay to say out loud in the last 6 months. And I was one of these people saying he's clearly in cognitive decline. And there was a real denial and pushback. I mean, MSNBC is probably the most egregious violator. Joe Scarborough's
a piece of shit. No, on that, like, he's lost all credibility.
They literally met with him and said to the camera,
he's the
to
best
their audience,
person I've ever,
he's sharper than ever. And then, like months later, we see him implode on camera.
I know, I hear you.
Those people that should stain their integrity forever, and they should not be trusted again.
So Scarborough, I put in his own camp, and I think that, I totally agree. But the thing is, I do view different levels of complicity here, and I think that there is like what you just said there was like, well, they would have asked the hard questions, and this is not something that people would apply to anyone in like conservative media vis-a-vis Trump. When I speak of like Fox News, like when you say like, is Fox News pushing hard enough against the Trump narratives in the various different cases or the lies of Trump? So I hear you, and I guess that is a kind of an implicit or tacit, I guess CNN and MSNBC are on the side of the Democrats, but we know MSNBC.
But they claim to be neutral.
Yeah.
Right? Fox News is openly conservative.
But like, MSNBC, I would put in the category of like the equivalent. I even think that they're trying to be the model of the Fox News on the left. CNN, we have the Jake Tapper clip, but what else do you have where he's like kind of going after Laura Trump? What else do we have from CNN? Is CNN not reporting on Biden's cognitive decline during the course of the...
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's lots of clips of them downplaying, denying, suggesting that, we're...
All right. That's the 2-hour mark. Gotta go take a break. Stop the stream there. Love you all. Bye.